I think one thing I really had wanted to do before having a child is just a silly goal. I'm not the fastest runner of all time, but I really wanted to break 4 hours in the marathon before having kids, because I imagined that, once I had children, I wouldn't, have the time to spend training and all of that. I didn't know any moms who were runners, but here in Boston, it's a very active city. And so I could see other people out and about. And so I think I could see that, okay, in one way or another, I can still fit this into my life, even if I won't be able to do it the same way I have been up to now.
I'm Keltie Maguire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. What's always interesting for me is where I will meet my next guest, because I come across people all the time. And of course, I'm naturally curious about their decision to have or not have kids and some of the different, aspects of this decision that sort of intersect with their choice of, again, having or not having kids. And I just never know who I'm going to come across and who's going to come on here as my next guest. So this guest actually reached out to me a few weeks ago. She's a freelance journalist who was working on a piece. And when I looked at her Instagram profile, I saw that she is very into running. She's run tons of marathons. She is a trained running trainer is the word I'm looking for. And she's also a mom of a young daughter. And so I was curious about sort of this relationship between this hobby and this pastime of hers, for any of you who might be fellow runners, but more specifically, because I think when we're facing this kids or child-free choice, we can often feel like the things that are really important to us are sort of coming under threat, if you will, especially if there is a hobby or a pastime or some sort of pursuit. It could be a business, it could be your career. And if that's something that you invest a lot of time and energy into, we often worry about, okay, what's going to happen if I have a child? Is that going to be taken away from me, if you will? Will I still be able to pursue this? And so this is the conversation I wanted to have with today's guest, Jennifer. Jennifer Heimlich is a freelance writer who covers health, fitness, and all kinds of wellness. With more than 15 years of journalism experience, she previously worked as the senior fitness editor for Well+Good and the editor-in-chief of Dance Magazine. Today, you can find Jennifer's work in various publications like Self, GQ, Time, and PS, among other outlets. A UESCA-certified running coach, Jennifer leads running tours in Boston in her free time and is almost always training for her next marathon. Jennifer Heimlich, thank you so much for being here. I think you might have been a bit surprised when I said to you, I want to hear your story, because I saw that you're a runner. And as niche as it may be, I did actually have someone recently message me saying they're really into running. They are grappling with this kids or child-free choice. And they'd love to hear from someone who, running is like a big pursuit of theirs. And I think aside from running, so if people are listening, they're thinking, running, I'm out. I don't want to listen to this episode. Even more broadly speaking, and also more specifically, we can say, I want to talk about this idea of identity and the things that are important to us, and how often when we're considering this choice of whether or not to have kids, and I want to hear from you, I'm putting maybe words in your mouth, but those things can feel perhaps under threat, or it can feel very scary to think about what may change if we decide to have a child or children. And so we'll be talking about those things and more today. I would love to just hear a little bit about yourself. So tell us what we need to know.
Sure. Yeah. I am a freelance writer based here in Boston, Massachusetts. And I've got one daughter. She's coming in on 3 very shortly. And as you mentioned, a big runner. I have my husband and I, we both kind of discovered running together and got into doing marathons together. And it's been a big part of our life for probably 15 years or so.
Super cool. Okay. And doing a little sleuthing around, I also saw, it looks like you either used to be or still are a dancer as well. Like that you have quite an active background, maybe in other sports as well as running.
Yeah, I not so much anymore, but I grew up as a serious ballet dancer, and was like on track to become professional. And then at the very last minute, I was like, oh, that's a very scary career path. I'd rather write about it. And so I ended up being working for a magazine about dance for many years, and running eventually came as a way to stay active in a similar way. That was a lot easier in an adult life than dance.
Yeah, I can relate a little bit to that because I used to do classical singing. And similarly, like I actually started my degree doing music and voice performance, and also thought, oh, I think sometimes these things seem really good in theory and like in our heads. But when we think about what that actually entails on a practical level, it's not always what we necessarily imagine or want it to be. So
Exactly. Yeah.
okay, cool. Well, I'm glad to hear. I mean, I think when we have a background in any particular area, it can often sort of like inform and inspire the types of things that we do in the future and in our adult lives. So, yeah, again, like doing a little digging around, I was like, oh, Jenny looks like she's like definitely focused on health and well-being and being active. So I look forward to hearing about how that intersects with this journey into motherhood.
Yeah.
So let me tell you, let me ask you, I should say, I have no idea. I won't tell you anything. Did you always want to be a mom?
No.
Okay.
I was living in New York. I went to New York for college and dance stuff and lived there throughout my 20s, early 30s. And at the time I had some friends who like, had baby fever, and I just like could not relate to that at all. I was like, wanted to keep the possibility open, but it
Yeah.
wasn't something I was like, oh, I can't wait to be a mom. And then that kind of shifted for me when my husband and I moved up here to Boston, and it's a slower pace of life. And I had a good friend who was like trying very hard to get pregnant. I was reaching my mid 30s, and I just started thinking about how, like, looking back, if I was imagine myself near the end of my life, looking back,
Mm-hmm.
if I hadn't had kids, I imagined regretting it. Whereas when
Yeah.
I imagined the opposite scenario, I didn't imagine regretting it. Did I say that right? Like I would always wonder what if I
Yeah.
hadn't had kids, but
Yeah.
otherwise. So yeah, at that point, my husband was on board, and so that's when we started trying to have our daughter.
Okay. And was it a relatively smooth journey from, deciding to have a child to then having a kid, or any roadblocks
No.
along the way? It was okay. I
Yeah,
always
no.
ask people that and they're like, most of the time the answer is no, it was not smooth at all. Okay. Are you able to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. It took us maybe a year of trying. And then the first time we had a miscarriage. Luckily, right after that, we then got pregnant with
Yeah.
Ada, our daughter. And so we didn't go through as much as a lot of couples go through for
Yeah.
sure. But yeah, no, it definitely was not. Okay, child. Now here we go.
Yeah, no, it's not like we flip an on switch and all of a sudden a baby appears. So
Right.
I love the name Ada, by the way. That's a beautiful
Oh,
name.
thanks. Yeah.
Okay, and in terms of, I'm curious. One topic we haven't talked too much about on this show thus far is miscarriage, and I'm interested for you, like, well, I don't want to make assumptions about what that experience is like for a woman, because from what I've seen and heard from friends, people can approach it from more of a pragmatic sort of standpoint of like, well, this wasn't meant to be. I have a physician friend who took a very okay approach. I guess it's like, this is how things go. And I've had other friends it's been a very emotionally challenging, traumatic experience having miscarriage. And so for you, how did that sort of fit into the journey to becoming a mom, do you think?
Yeah, I feel like a funny reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
There was the frustration of like, okay, we had already been trying for like almost a year, and
Yeah.
now we were just like set back to zero again, which I was annoyed with. But I think more than anything, I felt this weird embarrassment or shame around the fact that I had already started planning for a child, like thinking in my mind. And we had just started telling like a few friends, not a ton of people when we found out, but I felt like embarrassment of like, this isn't real, but I thought it was going to be real.
Yeah.
And so, which, I mean, looking at it logically, I should not have felt embarrassed or shamed or anything, but like,
Yeah.
we don't have logical feelings and emotions sometimes.
No, absolutely.
But at the same time, I understand your physician friend's experience, because also like our OB could see the reason why I miscarried is because there was something wrong with the fetus, like chromosomal problems. And so even if it had survived through pregnancy, it wouldn't have lasted long in life. So,
Mm-hmm.
obviously for the best. But yeah, it was an interesting experience. I didn't feel the sadness I thought I would feel. It was more just like frustration and shame. So, yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate you speaking to those emotions that maybe we don't hear about quite as often, because I do think often, and I love that there is more openness and discussion, and that more women seem to be sharing like, yeah, I had a miscarriage, or I've had multiple miscarriages, but it often is framed around, grief and loss, which is very, of course, understandable. But I like what you say of like, it doesn't necessarily make sense to feel shame or to feel embarrassment, but this sort of like, yeah, we've been talking about it. I've been getting my hopes up, and like, oh, now it's not happening. And so, an interesting perspective you've shared there. And I appreciate that. And I think when these things come up, whatever emotions we experience through this whole journey, I know for myself, and what I encourage my clients is like just trying to have compassion and acceptance for that, instead of having that second layer of like, oh my God, why am I embarrassed? What's wrong with me? Right?
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay. So Ada was born. You said she's almost 3 now. Tell me about those early days of pregnancy, and if you want, we can also talk about the pregnancy itself, anything that feels relevant as far as that experience. And of course, then I want to get into how this all kind of intersects with running. How was it becoming a mom? Did it surprise you? Was it different than you thought? Was it magical? Was it all of the above?
All of the above. Yeah, for sure. The newborn days I'd say were definitely not my favorite days. That was rough. I've honestly like blocked out a lot of it memory wise. I've had some friends who've recently had babies. They're like, oh, what is it like? I'm like, I don't remember. Maybe because there's a lack of sleep. But at the same time, as much as of a struggle as it was, that shift from not caring for this tiny being 24/7 to, constantly being in charge. I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I would. As someone who had been very ambivalent about kids, I think, at least in my world, I saw a lot of messages from other moms on social media and things about how hard motherhood is, and it absolutely is. But I hadn't anticipated the amount of love I would feel for her and how rewarding that would be, on just like the very small day-to-day, just like this undercurrent of love through everything. And so that was amazing to realize, and still is to.
I think this is one of the biggest things that's hard for people when they're on the fence about whether or not to have kids, because this is something that we cannot, I think for parents, it's hard to convey to someone who doesn't have children, right? It's an idea more than something. You can't share that feeling with me and be like, here, have a little taste of it, right? This is what it's like. And I see a lot of my clients wanting to think their way through this decision. And while I think our rational mind plays an important role in this decision, it's not the entirety of it. And that's something that when we look at it from the outside view, it's like, well, this just, all I hear is it's super hard and it makes no or little practical sense or whatever it is, right? If we want to do the pros and cons list, I think a lot of people find it's hard to get to the pros of having a child, depending, especially if you're on the fence and feeling ambivalent. Would you say, I mean, and this is, I know it can be a little bit of like a cliche, like it's hard, but it's worth it. I mean, presumably, yes, but like, how would you say that love and that feeling you had for your daughter, and the rewarding feeling made the difficult parts not feel as difficult? Or is it like, how would you kind of, what was your relationship with difficult like, if that makes sense?
Yeah. It's funny, as someone who is a writer, I've like tried to put it into words so many times and failed. I think the closest I've come in describing it is, I feel like life has gotten smaller, but the small things feel bigger. So like, when I was in New York in my 20s, I'd go out almost 4 or 5 times a week, either to work events or to run clubs or dance class or whatever it was. And then I became a mom, and all of that, is not possible. You just, you live in this like very routine world, doing what your child needs. And And sometimes, a lot of those routines take a lot more time than they used to, like just getting my daughter out of the house and getting her to daycare, especially now that she's a toddler. And she has her own thoughts and feelings and wants to put on 3 different, if only 3, I'm lucky, different outfits before we
Sounds
go.
like me.
And so it's like life is all about those little small things.
Yeah.
But they feel very big because it's very hard getting her dressed and getting her in the right dress that she wants and getting actually out the door. But it also, once we get out the door and we're walking to school, she starts singing and she's giving me kisses with her dolly. And so it's just like this very simple walk to school.
Yeah.
That's just like a totally mundane, daily, small thing. And it's this wonderful experience for both of us. And so, yes, it's definitely more difficult walking from here, the 5 blocks to school. And it's not just like certain moments pop up that are amazing. It's, there's, throughout, there's this just like undercurrent of kind of joy and happiness. And then sometimes she'll throw a tantrum and I forget all that. But yeah.
It sounds like what you're describing is like there's this kind of like richness or depth to these experiences. Maybe there's not the breadth of experiences that you had before, but you can go deeper within these, as you say, sort of mundane day-to-day things, which I know even as someone without children, I feel like as I age, like the saying, the little things are the big things. There's so much truth in that. These like sweet moments between whether myself and my husband so I can totally, again, it's like more of an intellectual grasping, but I can imagine that it must be very special.
That's a very great way to put it.
Okay. I'm glad it resonates with you as the writer. Although I'm not a writer by profession, it's when the words don't come and you can't adequately describe something, there's this frustration, right? Because you're like, this is my medium. I should be able to do this. So yeah. Maybe someday we'll be able to just share feelings and we're like, oh, okay, now I get what you mean. It would make this whole process easier for people, I think.
Definitely.
So when you were deciding with your husband to have a child, you mentioned there was still sort of that ambivalence, but hey, I just want to go back to that question. I think looking back on our life, it can of course be hard to know, well, what will I want or how will I feel when I'm older? But I would suggest to people listening, you don't have to overcomplicate this. If a clear thought or feeling doesn't come up, that's okay. But it might be helpful to think, if I was to look back from the end of my life or even like later in life, call it you're in your 70s. And I always say, I hope to be 100, healthy and 100. Looking back, what are the experiences that you would most like to have had? And do you anticipate you might regret that or not? I'm interested how much, if at all, your physical capabilities, your running, staying active, I think, and I want to talk about body image maybe in a separate question, but I think, how we identify ourselves and how we show up in this world, like, did that feel under threat at all with the idea of having a child? Or was it that the wish for a child, like, whatever, we'll figure that other part out? I'm curious how that came up for you.
Yeah, I would say for me personally, it was definitely there. I think one thing I really had wanted to do before having a child is just a silly goal. I'm not the fastest runner of all time, but I really wanted to break 4 hours in the marathon before having kids, because I imagined that, once I had children, I wouldn't, have the time to spend training and all of that. And I was so close to doing it, and then COVID hit, and then as soon as that all ended, started getting pregnant, and so was never able to do that. But at the same time, it wasn't something that was going to be a stopping point for me. I wasn't going to like stop and wait to get pregnant until after I could accomplish this goal. And I think running actually is kind of a great hobby for moms, because even though, yes, obviously, pregnancy and childbirth impacts you physically and you don't have as much time once you have children, it's a very flexible thing that you can do. You can run just about anywhere. You don't have to like go to a gym or meet people for a class unless you want to. You can just, any little free pocket of time wherever you are, you can go and run. If you're able to, you can stick the kid in a stroller, take them with you. And so I didn't know any moms who were runners, but here in Boston, it's a very active city. And so I could see other people out and about. And so I think I could see that, okay, in one way or another, I can still fit this into my life, even if I won't be able to do it the same way I have been up to now.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say about running. And I think, I don't know, running seems to be a largely popular sport. And I would say a lot of it is that flexibility, that accessibility, the fact that you throw on a pair of sneakers and you can do it anywhere for any length of time. It can be social, it can be solo. And that, even as a dog owner, I think for me, that's part of why I run quite frequently, because it's like two birds, one stone. Like, we both get out and get our activity. I can squeeze it between calls or meetings. It's not the same commitment as going to a gym or a class or whatever. So I can see that it's a great sport for a mom to have and also potentially take up, even if somebody hasn't been a runner to date. So I'm interested, did you run then all through, conceiving your child and pregnancy, and how did you approach that? And were there any worries around that from your standpoint, or potentially anyone else being like, oh my gosh, what are you doing?
So when I got pregnant, my husband had just been in grad school with a lot younger classmates. Yeah. And I remember one of them, before I got pregnant, one day he was out on a run and he came back and he's like, oh my God, there was this woman with an entire basketball in her belly and she was out running. It was so gross. And
so gross. Oh my gosh.
Yes. Okay. And that just like stuck with me. And so, when I was pregnant, yes, I ran up until like the last month or so when I started having joint pain in my pelvis. That was like too much. But that was always in my head, thinking of like, there's probably some little 20-year-old kid out there seeing me and going like, oh my God, what is she doing? That's insane. Yeah. But in general, no, other than, sometimes my in-laws being like, are you sure this is okay? Yeah, I didn't get many negative comments or anything.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And I mean, of course, so in online spaces, you see all manner of comments. I have seen sometimes women who are pregnant doing certain kinds of exercise or running. And of course, you've always got somebody who's like, oh, that's not safe and you shouldn't do that. And from what I've read and heard is like, if running's an activity that you had done before getting pregnant, it's perfectly safe to continue with running, provided there's no, I guess, complications or complicating factors to be considered. So,
right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm interested, like staying then so active through your pregnancy. Do you think that helped with the experience of your pregnancy and giving birth? Do you think it made it more challenging? I asked because I've heard also, I had a friend who's in her early 40s, recently had her first child. She's a really big runner. And she talked about, she was a little bit surprised. And I've also heard from some women, because they have such like strength and sort of tightness, it can also be like a counterintuitive thing to then like open up, if you will, and give birth. So I'm interested for you if that played in at all in your birthing experience or pregnancy, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I think I got very lucky. I had a very relatively easy labor and delivery. Okay. Yeah, I thought running as much as I did would help me have even more stamina for that, but even still, it was still exhausting. Yeah. But I didn't have any complications or anything like that. So. Did
you track it on Strava, your birth? Have you heard of people doing this?
Yes, I've seen that. And I was like, oh, I should have done that, but no, totally. I did not.
I don't think it's like a category you can choose from on your Garmin. But yeah, it is, it's funny. And I feel like I'd seen, probably some funny post or something that somebody had shared from somebody who was like a really like hardcore athlete or an ultra runner or whatever. And it's like, giving birth is, as people can appreciate, I'm sure, like no small feat. And it really is an athletic endeavor, I think, in a lot of ways, depending on what that birth experience is like. So,
yeah.
Okay. And so with running, like what's the thing when, okay, you give birth, I'm going to imagine it depends if you have a vaginal birth or a C-section in terms of when you may be able to like adopt the sport again. What's sort of the next step for people who want to get back into running from your standpoint? I understand you're not like a sports physician, but.
No, yeah, it was interesting. So I had actually had heard that you just need to, I had a vaginal birth. And so I heard with that, you just need to wait 6 weeks and then you can start running again. And I had actually, right before, I think 2 weeks before I gave birth, I was given an invitation to run the New York City Marathon. And then I calculated out, okay, well, I'll have 6 weeks to recover and then 12 weeks to train. And I'm not trying to go for time or anything. So that'll be like just enough to get through it. And so then that's what I started to do. And my husband has a friend who I think is a pelvic floor therapist. And she's like, oh no, the recommendations have changed. You're supposed to wait 12 weeks before you run. And I'm like, well, they changed too late. I already made this plan. And so I just stuck with what I was doing. And I luckily got lucky and I did not have any pelvic floor problems. But I think other women have, had problems with like leakage and things like that, prolapse. But yeah, so I think about like maybe a week after giving birth, I started just like by walking and like doing core exercises and things like that. Very, very gentle. And then just like, worked my way up to very short runs starting at 6 weeks.
And so did you do the marathon?
I did. Yeah.
And how was it?
Very slowly. Oh, so painful.
Yeah.
I would not do that again if I would. No.
I mean, I get that it sounds like running's been a big part of your life for a long time, but like, I would imagine that's not a huge amount of time to train after having given birth.
Yeah. I underestimated how hard it would be to get back into it after having taken off. I think it was like about a month or so before giving birth and then 6 weeks after. And then also just like the effects on your body, I still had, I don't know if this is true, but I read that because I was breastfeeding, you still have relaxin in your body, which is like the hormone that stretches everything out. Okay. And so it felt very weird to run when I first started back. I felt like an 80-year-old man, just like super stiff with no like bounce or spring to your joints or your tendons. And so it was just very, very hard physically.
Yeah.
But at the same time, thinking of it identity-wise, it was so helpful for my mental health and to feel like I was the same person again. And I had a way to reconnect to that woman I had been before becoming just like mom 24/7. So yeah, I say I wouldn't do it again, but I might.
By the way, I feel like an 80-year-old all the time when I run and I haven't given birth. So. Yeah, but I've heard, for example, like, I think, because I know when you're pregnant, like, I don't know, even like your joints and everything kind of like stretches out. Your body does all kinds of wild things, which is amazing. But I would imagine getting things back into order, so to speak, would be, take some time. So,
yeah. Okay.
Let's talk a little bit more about that identity piece then. And I'm interested for you, like, did you always know that running something that's, I want to maintain this needs to be important to me, I want to make this a priority? And how did you actually see that through? And I'm also wanting to know, how have other people been able to like support you with that? Because I think sometimes, especially as mom in a heterosexual partnership, I think a lot of women feel like, I'm not even going to be able to get away for like a shower, let alone to go running. So how have you been able to make this happen?
Yeah, I will say I'm very lucky in that my husband is like the number one, like, not even cheerleader, but like he pushes me to like, oh yeah, you should sign up for a marathon. You should sign up for an ultra marathon. And I'm like, no. Let's take us 2 steps back. He loves doing it himself. And he understands, he knows that I feel better as a person when I take my time to like go by myself, do my run. And so he very much will, more than anything else, he'll help me like get out and do my run if he can. He works in the emergency room, so his schedule is all over the place work-wise. And so sometimes it's hard, just finding the time. But whenever he can, he'll be like, oh yeah, you should totally go run a marathon and you should totally go do a 4 or 5 hour training run right now. I'll watch Ada. And so I think that has, for me, been obviously a huge, huge help.
So if you've been listening to the Kids Are Child Free podcast, you might be thinking, wow, Keltie asks such good questions. Now, maybe you're not thinking that, but I have had multiple people say they really appreciate the questions that I ask the guests on the podcast. And if you would love for me to put my thinking cap on and to ask you thoughtful questions to help elicit connection with your own desires and help you figure out what it is you want when it comes to your kids or child-free decision, you're definitely going to want to check out my one-on-one coaching offers. I work with a select number of individuals each and every month to help them get clear on the choice that is right for them, whatever that may be. If you want details on how we can work together, you can head to kidsorchildfree.com. I will also link directly to the page where I have details on my one-on-one coaching work if you want to check that out. And if you're curious about how this all works and whether it's the right fit for you, you can also book a complimentary 30-minute call with me where we can talk about your unique situation, where you're struggling with this decision, and how I can help you in the form of one-on-one support. This is wonderful. Interesting, this word lucky, and I don't want to say you're not lucky, but it would be interesting to think about the framing of like the guy who goes out golfing or like does his pursuit. Like, it's just interesting how it is so, like, it is uncommon, right? You're lucky in the sense that I think this probably is uncommon for a lot of women to be able to have a partner who like really urges and encourages them to do those things that are important to them and lets them go out and do it. And it's interesting because it is so often and commonly like it goes the other way. And what I hear, having spoken with, quite a few parents now, is like, it's really, you have to like both want and prioritize those things for yourself especially as a new parent, but having a partner who like essentially kind of forces your hand and is like, no, you're going, like, get out there, do it. I've heard this from a bunch of both friends as well as guests I've had on the podcast. Like, I guess, did the two of you come to agreement in that before? Like, this is something that I'm going to want and need to do. And like, yeah, absolutely 100%. Or how much of it has just been figuring out as you go versus having a plan?
Yeah, it's definitely nothing that we like sat down and talked about. I think there was, in a way, it was kind of just a understanding we've always had. I mean, this has been, kind of one of the basis of our relationship in a way. Like, one of our first dates was we ran the length of Manhattan, which was, I think, like, I don't know, something silly, like 16 miles. And that was just like, how we connected. Neither of us were huge runners before we met. But once we got together, we both got into the sport together, and it just became something that we did. And so we've just always understood each other on that level, that we both are we love being active and going on these random adventures. And so it was just never a question that we would completely cut it out of our lives just because we had a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like, it's obviously reflective of more than just like the value is running. It's like the value is, being active, having these adventures. But when it's so inherent to both you as individuals and your relationship, I agree. It's like, anything else we do for ourselves, like, of course I'm going to keep doing that. And my husband and I are similar kind of sport would be like, we both hike a lot. And I realize hikes with a child, especially when they start having that kind of autonomy, like you described, where it's like, no, I'm not going in the carrier. Like, I'm going to attempt to go up this mountain really slowly myself and probably whine about it. Hikes would look different, but like, absolutely, we would not stop having these outdoor adventures because it's so important for us to get out there and on the trail. And so I think for ourselves, and just thinking about someone who's approaching this kids or child-free decision, regardless of what you decide, but specifically if you're looking at this big life change of parenthood, is really solidifying for yourself, what are my values? What is really important for me? And like a non-negotiable, like, I need air to breathe. It's like, this is just something I've got to do. And I guess hopefully, I think sometimes we make assumptions about how things will be after we have a child, but I guess looking at, for example, your relationship and how it is right now, and does your partner respect and like allow, I use air quotes, you to do those things that are important to you? Or is it always just about them and the things they want to do, and, you having to hold down the fort, which I realize is a little bit different when you don't have children. I think that can be a big indicator of what it might be like in the future. So like, I guess I had a client recently who said, it was interesting. At the beginning of our program, she said, health, well-being, being active, that's really important to me. And that's a part of my identity I want to preserve when I have a child. Fair, good observation. Interesting. A few weeks later, she said, Oh, it's funny because I recognize that's not something I'm actually prioritizing in my life right now. So how am I going to uphold that if I have a child, right? And so I guess like having this, we need some, like we can't fall back on something if it doesn't exist in the first place.
Yeah. No.
I'm interested when you think about your relationship with your body. And like, I know for me as someone who's prioritized health from, healthy eating, being regularly active, it's a really big part of me and who I am. And so I'm interested, like, has that relationship with your body changed and shifted maybe as your abilities or what feels familiar to you changed and shifted through pregnancy, childbirth, having a young child? And how have you been able to sort of think about that? Like, have you ever been challenged and thought, God, I could do that before? Like, this doesn't look the same way as it did earlier, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, definitely a lot of frustration there. Particularly with running, a lot of running fitness just comes down to like how much you can put into it, how much time you spend running. You're just going to get better as a runner. And these days, I'm just a lot slower than I used to be. I had assumed I would just like, once I was back running, I'd get my old paces back and it would feel the same as it used to. But I just haven't gotten there just because I don't have as much time to put into it as I used to, even now that my body's completely healed from the childbirth experience. But so that's definitely been frustrating. And then there's, the body image part of it. I've simply never been able to lose those last 5 pounds that I've gained in pregnancy. That was just like what? Why not? Like, what's changed? And I guess like, having a kid, that's what's changed. But it's just like, it's funny. I saw someone recently say, we have this idea that like pregnancy should leave no trace on the body.
Yeah.
And it's just not true. It does leave a trace. I, was prepared for my boobs to be saggy afterwards, but all the rest, I thought it would just like go back, and that's just not how it worked.
Yeah. How have you contended with that, or sort of like, is there a way you've learned to think about that, or something that you say to yourself to get through those tough times? Or is it just like, yeah, this feels kind of sometimes, but
I think, just embracing the like, it is what it is, but I wouldn't not go through pregnancy and I wouldn't not have my daughter because of it. So I don't have any great epiphanies of coming to terms with it. It's just kind of one of those things, just like, here we are.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, when we grapple with something, it's like we sort of grow and evolve with and around that, but it doesn't mean it ever gets comfortable or easy when things change. And I mean, in a way, when you think about like having brought a whole human into this world, it kind of makes sense, right? Like things would never quite be the same again, right? Because your life's not the same again. And your body has gone through this like incredible metamorphosis, if you will. So I agree. It's this leave no trace thing is like such a good way of putting it. And that's of course what's perpetuated in our media and what we see or think we're seeing, right? But like, why would it be that way? And if it is the case for anyone, like great, but I'm sure that's the anomaly. Like it's the exception to the rule. So
yeah. And I know like with running, actually, there are lots of runners who come back from pregnancy and are faster than they used to be. A lot of those women, though, are professional runners who they have the time to, really focus on running, and because that's their job, they need to, they're depending on that. So it's like, it is possible, it's possible, but am I willing to make the sacrifices to make that happen? No, that's not where I am in my life right now.
Yeah. Well, and it must be also, I mean, I appreciate if it's your profession, then that comes with certain pressures, but that must be a lot of pressure, especially if someone, is competing professionally and they've got upcoming races that they're going to run, and to know you've got to quote, bounce back or feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. That must be really challenging. So
it's got to be a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about, and I mean, the last thing I want to say on that, like you're also, I realize your daughter's almost 3, but like, that's also not that long a period of time, right? Like who knows what the future may hold.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. I would love to talk about growing your family. You've mentioned that was something that you grappled with. Do we have another child? Had you always thought when you had your daughter that you would be like one and done, or did you envision a bigger family? And how have you and your husband I guess, thought about that decision.
Yeah, it's so funny because whenever I thought about having kids, I never like even thought about the question of like one or more or
Yeah.
not, or it was just like kids or no kids.
Yeah.
And so then once we had her, it's like, okay, this is a lot of work. um, and we love it, but it's a lot. And for the first like year or so, I was like, okay, this is it. Definitely no
Yeah.
more. There was one point where I thought like, I think I missed my period by like 2 days. I was like, oh my God. And then it came. And so I was like, okay, phew. But then as she got, I don't know, I guess probably closer to 2 or so, I started being like, well, it starts to get a little easier as they get a
Yeah.
little older. And it's like, well, do we want another? It would be great to give her a sibling. There's definitely, you get a lot of messages of like, oh, you have to give them a sibling. You don't want them to be, a spoiled only child. So we grappled a lot with it, going back and forth. We were really on the fence. And so our kind of what's the word? Our way of not dealing with the answer was just by me giving up birth control and seeing where the cards fell and letting it just like whatever happened. I am no spring chicken. I am now 40. And so we're like, well, maybe I'm almost in perimenopause anyways. So who knows? So we just kind of like let the cards fall where they did. And then this January, I ended up getting pregnant. And so now I've got a second on the way.
Congrats. It's exciting.
Thanks.
Yeah. Has it mostly been excitement, or
yeah,
what are the feelings around it?
It was so funny because for as much as like I had earlier been like dreading it, now once I like, took the pregnancy test, it was just like pure excitement. And then going to the OB and seeing the ultrasound was just like so amazing. And so there's still 100% a lot of fear around it and like, how is this going to change things? But more so excitement for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much interesting messaging around this. Like, okay, so I hear, and interestingly, so if anybody's listening, like, let me start my thoughts like 4 different directions. If anyone is listening who already has a child or even a couple and is considering another, I have had a few messages from people recently being like, do you also help people who are wondering about growing their family further? Because there's some parallels with being on the fence without kids and then being on the fence if you want to grow your family. Of course, you've got more information to work with when you already have a child as far as what that experience is like. But there's parallels in the sense that I think there's a lot of, like you say, external, messaging around, well, you're not just going to have one child, and just similar to, you're not going to not have kids. Of course, this is the wrong thing to do. And it's another example of just how hard it is sometimes being a woman and the fact that you can't win, right? It's like you can't do it right. If you have 2 kids, maybe people think you should have 3 kids. I mean, who knows? Or let's say you have kids of the same gender. People might think, well, you want to try for a boy now or whatever. So yeah, it's just interesting to hear about it. Like, would you say these questions you had in your mind around should we have another and give her a sibling and these sorts of ideas of an only child, is that something just like maybe that came from a broader narrative that has existed in your mind for a long time? Or were people saying to you and asking lots of questions like, and when's another coming? And you should do this? More the latter?
Both. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, always been there. But then also, I mean, as soon as my husband, I always laugh at this, as soon as I gave birth and they're wheeling me from the labor room up to the like recovery room, the nurse says, okay, we'll see you in 2 to 3 years. And I was just like, the last thing I want to hear, shut up. And so it's like, seriously, from that moment, even when I was pregnant, had people say, all right, and then when's the second coming? And it's like, oh my gosh, give me a minute.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of nonstop.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know for me, like I try and be mindful of that. I have a friend who had a baby recently, and I don't know if she has plans to or desires to have another, but it's like her kid's 6 months old. Like I could ask it, but like, I'm not even going to ask it. It's also kind of like almost drives a sense of like, it's never enough, right? It's like, okay, you have this beautiful, healthy, wonderful child, and yet you should go have another child or more children. And so I think it's maybe better just to like wait and see if the conversation gets opened up by the person who would be bearing the repercussions of that decision to have a kid or not.
No.
Yeah, it's also interesting because I've heard from people, big difference between 1 and 2 as far as like, there's just, it's lots more going on. And I've also heard from people, well, once you have a kid, it's like, you've already got kids, so you may as well have a bunch. So we'll have to check back in a couple of years' time and see,
Yeah. Yeah,
see if it's like just a little bit of a difference more, or I've also heard people say like having one kid's a little bit like being child free. And I'm like, I don't know. To me, it seems kind of like having kids. So.
Yeah. Yeah. You hear all things. And I think it partly depends on like your lifestyle.
Absolutely.
And like, so yeah, we'll see how it is for us.
Speaking of your lifestyle and just life in general, would you say things have changed a lot since having your daughter, or less so, and in which ways?
Definitely a lot. Everything's just kind of different. It's you are tied to this person and having to take care of them.
Yeah.
You don't have the freedom of just like, picking up and traveling easily. Like, yeah, you can. We have taken our daughter. Both our parents live in California, so we go there all the time. We go there at least 2 or 3 times a year. We've traveled internationally to London with her and things, but it's a lot harder than just like, hopping on a plane and going. And for my work, I get a lot of different opportunities to go places. And I pretty much only say yes to 1 a year now because it's like, okay, have to check with my husband, see if he's able to take off work so that he can take care of her. And it's just, it's a lot of logistics. And even just the day to day, as I mentioned, earlier, it's like, before you have children, after work, you can go out and meet friends spontaneously. And sure, you can also do that once you have a kid, but it's a lot more planning and logistics. And it becomes, for me, usually the calculations are, it's not worth it. It's so hard that, no, let's plan a month in advance and figure out this one day that might work. And then, it's just different.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you said it's not necessarily worth it. And that's kind of what's going through my mind when you're describing that, is I can see how you'd have the sense of, forget about it. Let's just not drink spontaneously tonight, because everything I'd need to do to make that happen, these would have to be the best drinks I've ever drank.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I sometimes I'll complain if like my husband loves going to musical concerts and we go to one that I don't love. I'm like, why did I waste my one night out going to this thing? Whereas before we'd like go to stuff and I'm like, I didn't love it, but whatever.
Yeah.
We'll do something else another night. So
yeah, totally. Let me ask you this. If you could send a message to past Jennifer about this kids or child-free decision, maybe the ambivalence you were feeling or uncertainty, any fears you had, what would that message be? What would you want to tell her?
That's a great question. I think just like, don't worry so much. It's going to be worth it. And I think the biggest thing for me that I have learned so far in these almost 3 years is that the stages you go through with a kid they go so fast. It's so you feel like, I remember one of the hardest things for me in the newborn stages, I felt like this was going to be my life forever. I'm going to have this tiny child who I can't put down or else she screams, who I have to breastfeed every hour and a half, all through the night included. And I thought that was just going to be my life forever, the rest of time. But it changes so fast. And like soon before I knew it, she's not breastfeeding as often. She's sleeping through the night. I can put her down on the floor and she can now walk to the next room. But it's like things change for better or worse, because also, when she was that little, I could just strap her to my chest and go anywhere. And it was like very easy. So anyways, I think for me, that was one of the biggest things I wasn't prepared for with motherhood, and that I had a lot of kind of fear around. I always thought of motherhood as that newborn stage. But it really is like this whole complicated thing that changes over time. And it's like, it's dynamic, I guess. So it's not just one thing.
Absolutely. No, I like how you frame that. And I think one of the conversations I sometimes have with clients is the idea that, we see these, of course, as like it's a dichotomous sort of, I do or don't have kids, and it's the big life-changing pivoting decision. But there are so many decisions within that decision. And there's different ways that we can sort of like make our way forward, if you will. And through time, inevitably we will move into the future, right? And
No.
it's funny you bring this up, because this morning I had coffee with a friend of mine and her 2-year-old, who the daycare was unexpectedly closed today. And I'm very happy to spend time with my friend's kids, but I did have a moment of leaving where I was like, oh, that was full on, because it's like he's running around, he's touching things, and he's pulling down like, the glass sugar dish. And she's very relaxed about it. Of course, I'm the one sitting there like, oh my gosh. And I mentioned it when I went to my Pilates class after to the teacher who does not have children. And I said, oh, wow. I said, full on having kids. And she said, yeah, but and I think I said he was 2. She goes, yeah, but it's such a short period of time. And it was just this reminder of like, it is full on, but it's also that doesn't last forever, for better or worse, right? Of course, this is also like such a precious, curious, beautiful age. And it's like, I love seeing him like explore the space. But I think it's easy for us when we're stuck on this decision, or even as someone without kids, to sort of be like, ooh, look at that over there. And it's like, that's A, not the entirety of the experience. And B, that's also just a small period of time in which you might be having those sleepless nights or dealing with teenage angst or whatever. It won't last forever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you say that. I remember, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years before I had Ada, I went away for a weekend with a bunch of friends, and 2 of them brought their children with them. And I remember I had that same feeling you mentioned of that, like, oh my God, that was full on. Like, I need a vacation from that trip away. Like, that was so much. And what's funny is now as a mom, I don't feel like that when I'm with my own daughter. I don't know if it's because you go through these stages and it transitions slowly. And so you get so used to them playing with the sugar dish and running all over. And then you relax into it as your friend did, or at least I should speak for myself. I relax into it, and, you have to be on watching them, but it's a very different experience.
Yeah. Thanks for giving voice to that. And I think, that's some consolation perhaps for people who are on the fence and considering motherhood and parenthood. I think there's, I think we touched upon this a little bit earlier in our conversation, but there is a lot of, I don't think it's intentional fear mongering, but because there's more honesty about motherhood and what it entails. And of course, we know, especially in the US where you are, there's a real lack of support systems for many people. There is often this feeling for people who aren't sure of like, oh my God, this just looks terrible. And I really am glad that you're able to speak to the fact that it can be a very joyful experience, and that life, while it changes and changes in many ways, that you can still do those things that you enjoy and still have this, in the case of running, this hobby and pastime that's really important to you. So,
For sure.
You know what? I had one last question I want to actually ask you on that topic. And it's interesting because I was thinking about like, first of all, I want to know a little bit about how you view you pursuing your running and continuing to do that with your young daughter. Like, if you hope or anticipate that shows her something, like, if it is an example for her, if you will. Is that something you think about at all?
Yeah. It's so funny. It's something I've, both my husband and I, as very active people, we want her to like, have that same joy that we get out of being active. But it was never something I kind of consciously thought about, like, oh, I want to be this example for her. But one thing that we love to do as a family, there's like here in Boston, there are a lot of like local little 5K races. And so we'll take her in the stroller, and we've run with her ever since like she was old enough to be able to run with her in the stroller. And so she's probably done like 10, 20 races or something at this point.
That's so
and
cool.
She loves it. She loves it. Even if we're just like walking down the street, anytime she sees a run, she goes, runner. And then she loves, sometimes we'll race to school. She loves, and she's very fast. It's really cool to see her with like the other kids, and I'll see her like run and she beats them. I'm like, yes. As someone who's not like talented as a runner myself, I'm like, yeah, she's good. But so it's really fun to see her have that joy. And also, like, as my former dancer self, she loves dancing and music. And so it's something we just do at home all the time. And so it's kind of been not something I was conscious about, but as I've seen it happen, it has been really rewarding to see.
Yeah. Oh, that's neat. And, it's interesting what you say about not necessarily being conscious about it. And what I sort of also interpret is like, it's not the reason you're necessarily doing this to be like, I am setting the example. And I want to touch on that because I think sometimes when, specifically with moms, when we talk about like having things for yourself, we frame it in the context of that'll make you a better mom. That's going to allow you to show up better for your child or children, which I'm sure is true. But I also would say it's important to have these things just because it's important for you to have them, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think it comes back a lot to like the mom guilt that is just like inherent in our society, whether it's other people putting it on us or us putting it on ourselves, like, oh, I'm taking time for myself. Parenting is supposed to be this 24/7 thing where everything I do is to, help my child. How can I justify this? And it's like, oh, it's setting a good example for her. I think there's a lot of pressure for that. But it's so important just to, still have your own life as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Before we wrap up, I have 5 rapid fire questions I ask almost all my guests. Sometimes we run out of time.
Sure.
Okay. Being a mom is?
It's so weird. The first word that came to mind was fun.
I knew you were going to say that. Being a mom is not?
Easy.
I knew you were going to say that too. What do you think one tool or resource might be that could help somebody who's on the fence about this kids or child-free decision?
I think talking to a clarity coach.
Yeah, good answer. I love it. Okay, what is one thing that you would like someone who is child-free by choice to know?
Own it and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And don't let other voices get in your head.
Good advice. Okay, and lastly, if you could give a piece of advice to someone who's on the fence about whether or not to have kids, what would that piece of advice be?
Try to block out the messages from other people.
Yeah.
And connect to what is true for you. I know it's hard, but if you can.
Yeah, I agree. Very important, hard, but important. So thank you so much, Jennifer. Sure. Okay, where can people find you? I know you write for a bunch of different publications. What do they need to know so they can connect and see what you're up to?
Sure, yeah. Probably the easiest way is to follow my Instagram. It's the Jenny Maneuver, based off of my last name, Heimlich.
I was wondering.
So, yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, perfect. I will include the handle, the link to Jennifer's Instagram in the show notes of today's episode. And thanks so much for coming on to have this conversation with us and with me. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, I've been a little bit lax with you lately. Allow me to explain. So I get messages on Instagram to my DMs or emails pretty much every single day from you saying how much you love the podcast, how you've discovered the work I'm doing through the podcast, how much you love the conversations on the podcast. Lots of praise. Yes, it is wonderful for my ego. I always enjoy getting these messages. It makes me feel really grateful and appreciative when you take the time to reach out. But the reason I say I've been a little bit lax lately is because when I first started the podcast, if I got positive feedback from anyone about an episode or the show, I would say, I would love for you to do me a favor and leave a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And the last 2-3 months, I haven't been asking as much because, it's hard sometimes as a business owner and as a podcaster to say, hey, can you do me a little favor? But a big way the podcast gets discovered is through ratings and reviews. And it helps us to reach more people. And they really do make such a difference. I also, of course, love having this sort of social proof, if you will, to be able to show people this is what other people are saying and thinking about the podcast you want to tune into. So my ask of you, whether or not you've been one of those people who sent me a lovely note in the last 2-3 months, if I haven't asked you, I would love for you to leave either a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. We are so close to cracking 200 5-star ratings or reviews on Spotify. We're 9 away right now. Can we get there in the next week? I would love to get to 200 5-star reviews or ratings, I should say, on Spotify. So if you are listening and you have not yet done so, go into the app, Whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a rating or review. It will seriously take you 1 minute of your time, and I will be very grateful, and it will go a really long way to helping this podcast get out into more people who are on the fence's ears. That was a mouthful. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.